Well, I can tell you exactly. It's like Kennedy's assassination. Everybody remembers where they were on that day.
Welcome to Cold War Conversations.
So, an extraordinary night of euphoria in Berlin. Within hours of East Germany's decision to let its people go by opening the border to the west, the city erupted in a frenzy of celebration.
Astonishing news from East Germany, where the East German authorities have said, in essence, that the Berlin Wall doesn't mean anything anymore.
But tonight, there were no filters, no checks. At midnight, the border was thrown open, and the crowd surged through the open gates.
We want to have the experience to go this way, and we want to go back to our country.
You don't want to stay in the West?
No, never.
Our interview today is in a different format. Cold War Conversations is working with the Imperial War Museum on a project called Voices of the Wall. We will be capturing personal testimonies of people's experiences of the Cold War, which will later become part of the podcast. Therefore, this episode will be a composite of previous and unheard interviews of how people heard about the momentous opening of the Berlin Wall 30 years to the date this podcast is published. Now, I can see a large increase in listeners of late, with some of you binge listening the entire back catalogue. If this podcast was a magazine, you wouldn't mind paying a few quid or dollars a week, so I'm asking you to support us for the bargain price of $3 a month. In the past few weeks, Anders Olsson, Gregory Morrow, Michael Noble, Bernd Vageg, Mark Vigas, Brian Carroll and Scott Gregory have joined in helping to cover the show's increasing costs and keep us on the air. Plus, they've got that sought-after Cold War Conversations coaster heading their way too. Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate for more information. So, back to today's episodes. We have some great stories from that momentous day in 1989. Welcome to our Cold War conversation. This is Janina, who is a 15-year-old living in a village near the Polish border.
It was a Thursday night. I came home with my dad from some sort of village meeting where people discussing what was happening. And my mum said the wall had come down, and we didn't quite believe it because it was not very realistic. But it did, and the next day in school, a lot of people were just not there. I had to go to school, unfortunately. My parents didn't let me go off, and then I had to go to school as well on a Saturday, and there was really barely anyone there.
This is Victor Grossman, who was a US soldier who defected to East Germany in the 1950s. He continued to live in East Germany through to the fall of the wall and continues to live in Berlin today.
I must have been at home. It was late at night. I was at home. I had watched on television this announcement by this Schabowski when he took this paper out of his breast pocket and read it as if he was new to him and said, "Oh, the wall seems to be open." And the journalist said, "When?" And he said, "Right now." I saw that on television. I was amazed, of course, like everybody, although I wasn't quite sure that it really would be open. But thousands and tens of thousands of people took him at his word, whether he really meant that immediately or not. They took it that way and flooded the exit stations and just pushed their way out, basically. And for me, this was a very mixed emotion, created very mixed emotions. I might mention that my wife and both sons went the next day, as almost everybody did, to West Berlin. First thing you did was to go to the bank and get this 100 marks of welcome money so you could buy things. I did not go. And of course, as I say, I had mixed feelings because on the one hand, I could see the rejoicement of so many people who could finally get out as they dreamed or hardly dared to dream of, and see their relatives and travel, etc., etc. I could see that, and it couldn't leave me cold. At the same time, I also felt this is the beginning of the end, or not quite the beginning, had been a little sooner, but this is a big step towards the end of the GDR, which really made me sad.
This is Gillian Cox, who was a US student travelling around East Germany in November 1989. On the night of the fall of the Berlin Wall, she was in West Berlin, and this is her story. So you were just chilling in West Berlin, yes. And the 9th of November, you're watching TV?
We were actually listening to the radio.
Yeah.
My friend's roommate was in the other room watching the TV. And my friend was practicing his English by listening to the BBC. And, it's like, oh, yes, definitely coming along. That was better. And all of a sudden, my friend's roommate comes in from the other room and said, "Did you just hear that?" Oh, no. Christoph over here was practicing his English. Well, let me see if they're going to run it again. And they ran it again. And it was unmistakable. Oh, free travel for East Germans. Oh. So we grabbed our jackets. I grabbed my camera as well. And we just went outside in the direction of the Berlin Wall. And we just... And
were there lots of people on the street at this point?
The streets were starting to fill up and got, I'd say, even more full by the second, because everybody was walking out of their apartments. Everybody, because it was, is this real? Is this real? And we heard the crowds building on the eastern side. And then I'd say everybody just lost track of time because history was happening and we were all in the thick of it.
So where did you head towards?
Well, first we headed in the direction of the wall to make sure that this was actually real. And then we just started walking back towards the direction of Kafirstendamm and all of that.
We now hear from Antje, who featured in our episode A Cold War Romance. She married a British guy and was travelling across Europe when she heard about the opening of the wall.
And it was quite late by then, and we were listening to the World Service in the car, and just before, about 20 minutes before we crossed over, or we reached the French border, they announced on the World Service that they had opened the crossings in Berlin, that the wall had come down.
And how did you feel about that?
I don't know. It was just, I couldn't believe it. And for me, oddly enough, the main reaction was, God, I went through all this hassle and I could have just walked through 3 days later. Yeah. It was just mainly, really? Yeah. Now? Yeah. And Tim was a bit annoyed. He said, we've missed the biggest party in Europe by a few days. So yeah, it was, and then we reached, 20 minutes later, we reached the French border, and I needed all my paperwork be stamped, and they needed to see my visa. And so I had to actually go and show my passport, and the French border guard looked at my passport and he couldn't believe it. And he just said words to the extent of, wow, you were quick. Because they had obviously just heard what was going on. And 20 minutes later, he saw his first East German passport there. Yeah. He wanted to keep it as a souvenir, but I said, no, I still need it. Yeah.
Phil Logan was a soldier working on the close defence of the Pershing nuclear missile in West Germany.
Well, I was actually in Neu-Ulm, Germany, back at the barracks, and then the news broke, and we all rushed to a TV set, such as there were back then, because it was, some of us couldn't get German television. But it was covered enough on the American news that we could get, because back then we didn't have the 24-hour news, so we had to get the breaking news as it came in. And it was exciting. It was just unbelievably exciting at that time to see that wall finally come down.
Yeah. Yeah. And so were you I'm just interested to know, were you lying on your bunk and somebody came in and said, you'll never guess what's happened? Or
yeah, that's pretty much the way it happened. Is no one expected it to happen. And then somebody, because, we had a CQ back then, or I guess they still do have them, where the guy just they assigned 2 guys to watch the desk overnight and listen for the phone. And the CQ came around, was telling everybody that was in the barracks, hey, did you hear the walls coming down? And then it's when we all rushed to a TV set. And sure enough, there it was. The world changed overnight.
John Green was a British journalist working for East German broadcasting organisations.
I was actually next to the wall on the 9th of November, 1989. We got one of our regular meetings of all the colleagues, the film colleagues, and we were having our meeting there. I mean, it was clear things were bubbling under the surface, but suddenly we heard all these car horns outside, and we saw rows of Trabants and Wartburgs moving towards the border, and we realised something must have happened, and that was when the wall was opened, and so that was very clear then. There was no going back to the old GDR. That was now finished. And
what was the immediate reaction of your colleagues to that? Was there a mixture of people who were believers and those that thought that reforms needed to happen?
I think all my Western colleagues were clear that reforms needed to happen. I think my GDR colleagues were stunned and didn't make any immediate comments. They kept their thoughts to themselves. But we were very clear that things could never be the same again, and so that was it was a moment of big change in Europe. That was clear.
Antje Arnold was an 11-year-old girl living in East Germany and the author of the book The Girl Behind the Wall. You were 11 years old when the wall falls. How did you become aware of that happening?
Yeah, so I actually, went to school with my brother and on a Saturday, and I think it was a Saturday, and there was nobody there. There was nobody there. There was a couple teachers, a couple other students, but nobody else. And that's sort of, the teacher that were there, they were like, okay, you just, go home. The wall came down type of thing. And so it was, I didn't really know exactly what that meant. And I always look back that there might have been some differences of the awareness of it, depending on if you lived really close to the border, being the wall being sort of in your face on a regular basis versus living out in the boondocks, and not really seeing that all the time. And so my dad wasn't even home. He was, I think he was still doing something at the police school and that sort of thing. And my mom was working at the army at that time, and so she wasn't really aware of it either. So in a way, it was a surprise to all of us in a way. But I know some of my friends' parents were apparently right on top of that, apparently, because they didn't show up at school that day.
Yeah.
So I don't know if my parents sort of decided to not pay attention to a lot of the news and that sort of thing. But basically, my brother and I broke the news to my mom.
Wow. And how did she react to that?
I think that there was sort of a confusion and maybe not really finding that to be true. Do we believe that? Do we not believe that? So there's a lot in the air. I felt is this for real? Is this temporary? What do we do? Because the other thing, what happened was that, we, like my mom, and they were told to not go to West Berlin or West Germany because, they were still working for, like the Volkspolizei and the army, and you weren't allowed to do that, So there was a lot of hesitation, confusion, and sort of things. And I'm like, well, if my parents are confused, then I have no idea what's going on. So.
Yeah. Mark Baker was a US journalist working out of Vienna, covering Cold War Eastern Europe, including Prague. Amazing scenes. Can you remember, when you first heard that the wall was open?
I was in Vienna at the time. I was not in Berlin. It was just, obviously an incredible moment. And so my girlfriend at the time in Vienna, we went on the 9th to Berlin, and on the day of the 9th, and we spent about 3 or 4 days there. We couldn't believe it. So, I was in Vienna. I saw it in the newspaper, saw it on television, and the very next day we were on the train and going up to Berlin to see it for ourselves.
Wow. And just describe sort of what it was like, if you can.
It was absolutely amazing to be able to we spent a lot of time on the public transportation system, of course, and riding around through that. And it was just, it was just an amazing party. I had just come back from that trip to Prague, in which I had interviewed all those people who told me that change was not going to come to Czechoslovakia. And I had actually written that type of story for our magazine, Business Eastern Europe. And, of course, immediately I felt like I totally missed the story, So I guess I was a little bit bittersweet.
Yeah,
for me.
I think it's fair to say that you weren't the only one there. So did you have did you actually say to yourself at the time, wow, I'm here in Berlin at such a pivotal moment in history, or did you not think it was such a big event?
Both, actually. I mean, it was an enormous event. I was, but I didn't have the presence of mind to really document it. I mean, somehow we were just carried away with events. When I look at my pictures of Berlin from that time, it's just us standing on a train platform or something like that. There's very little of the excitement of the time. So I don't know what I was pointing my camera at, I'm not sure, but no, we were completely aware of the historic moment, of that. I just wish I had more of a presence of mind to have kept better notes, to have written really what my impressions were and what I was seeing at the time exactly, and what I was thinking about it at the time, because, obviously, that's very important for, to when you look back on like in our conversation, to be able to have those notes at my disposal and really to be able to tell you exactly what I was thinking. All I can remember is that I was very excited, taken by complete surprise, also professionally, and I think having a pretty good time.
Yeah, I was going to say, maybe you hit the sect too much, or I don't know.
I don't even remember where we stayed. I don't even really remember how we got up there.
Yeah, well, there you go. That tells a story in itself, Mark. Torsten Belger was an East German trainee army officer.
And then come the 9th of November and the wall being opened by mistake. Didn't know anything about that until 3 days later.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. So
because it was only reported on East German television.
3 days later. And that's how
nobody knew.
And that's how you learnt about it. Did you actually watch the TV broadcast, or did somebody come in and say?
I can't remember if I actually personally watched the TV broadcast. Probably did.
Yeah.
Usually tended to look at it because we knew there was something going on.
Yeah.
Obviously, but didn't really know what was going on.
Yeah.
And until I think it was 3 days later after the 9th, so it would have been the 12th.
Yeah.
12th or 13th of November that it was officially announced.
Right.
In East Germany and in the East German news that basically the gist was that travel restrictions have been relaxed, and blah, blah, blah. And then eventually it transpired that, well, actually they've opened the borders.
Yeah.
We didn't know that.
Right. And then
they deliberately kept us in the dark, so
they wanted to keep you, how can I put it, ideologically pure, probably.
Totally.
Or,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Because obviously, but if we had known that really was what was going on, and really that like it was quite a popular movement, uprising, if you want to call it that, then obviously, we might have had second thoughts.
Yeah.
About going out there and stopping what was going on. So we didn't have a clue.
Anke Holst was from Rostock in East Germany. She was living in Berlin.
So I lived in Berlin, and I actually lived quite close to the wall in Friedrichshain, which is which is now one. It's also, but now when I look it up, it's like Friedrichshain Kreuzberg or Kreuzberg Friedrichshain, and that those two quarters are now one is just for me still the weirdest thing, because they used to be on the different sides of the wall. Yeah. So it was very close, and strangely, I broke my foot on the way to work a week before the 9th of November. So by the time the 9th of November came around, I was lying at home with my foot up in a cast at my mom's in Rostock.
Right.
But we were all watching that TV broadcast, obviously, the press conference with the Schabowski and the thing he said. And the weird thing is, I don't remember hearing it. I don't remember going crazy about anything in that press conference at all. But clearly everybody in Berlin went, well, we should probably check that out. Did you hear that? I don't remember any kind of from that press conference any kind of instant reaction. The reaction came the next morning when we realized what had happened overnight in Berlin.
Sabina was 13 years old and living in East Berlin. Her father was a Volkspolizei officer.
The night that happened, it was kind of sort of off the cuff the way it's happened, because, they had that press conference where the journalists were asking, did you just say the borders are open? From when are the borders open? When can people go over? And they said, they kind of looked through their papers and went, I think it's now.
Yeah, sofort, I think he said, Schabowski.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. And I think a lot of people just, because it was so dangerous to approach the border and so many people had been killed trying to cross it, I think people were just stunned at first. And then, people started going up to the border, and the guards didn't know anything about it, and they just had to cave in the end. So it all kind of happened late at night, and I wasn't with by then. And I think my parents were always quite careful anyway about that kind of stuff. So the next day I went to school, and I saw two of my friends walking the way to school, but they didn't have their bags with them. And I said, where are you going? What are you doing? They said, we're going to West Berlin. And I was like, yeah, right. And then they did show up in the end, because they were just too chicken to skip school. And then I thought they just made it up. But then over the next few weeks, more and more people were missing or didn't come back to school, and that sort of, by then, obviously, we were aware that the wall is open, but we were still unsure about what was going to happen, how we were meant to behave, especially the teachers. Are we now still following the rules to the letter, or is that changing? And it was quite an uncertain time, because we just didn't know what was going to happen. Are they going to close the wall again? And and if you now show some sort of enthusiasm about the wall being down and they put the wall back up, will that have negative consequences for you?
Michael Rafferty was a US soldier serving at Checkpoint Charlie on the momentous day that the wall opened.
I was watching AFN, so I was just sitting there watching TV when they said that the travel restrictions were being lifted. Now, during that time, there was a lot of movement into Hungary and Czechoslovakia, and people were going around about to get out of East Germany. And So I didn't really think anything of it. I called down to the checkpoint, Nate Brown, Staff Sergeant Brown, who was a senior NCOIC down there.
Mm-hmm.
I said, Nate, is there anything going on? He said, nope, it's pretty boring. And I said, okay, well, I'll be there to relieve you at 6 a.m. He said, okay, I'll see you then. Now, it was Veterans Day. So we were expecting a whole ton of veterans to come up. There was a 4-day weekend. So not just veterans, but soldiers coming up because they had a 4-day weekend. So we were expecting it to be busy anyways. And when I got there at 6 a.m, I was briefed on the way down there that it was a mess. And I got to Nate, and I said, you told me nothing was going on. He just shrugged his shoulders and looked at me like I was crazy. He didn't even say anything to me. He said, it's all yours.
So it's just like this human onslaught, this avalanche of humanity coming through the checkpoint.
If you've ever sat next to a Trabi, the Trabi has a distinctive smell.
Yeah.
And it would idle right next to the checkpoint door.
Lovely.
And you do that for 12 hours, you're not feeling so hot. So I was not feeling so hot after the completion of that day. It was pretty bad.
And did any of the East Germans that came over speak to you? Oh,
many.
What were they saying?
Mainly, it was a drunken happiness. It was just, a lot of them were just happy. You get strange hugs, and it wasn't like, thank you for being. It wasn't. They didn't really know about it. It was just they were just happy to be over.
Yeah.
And they went to the first thing they did was they got their money at the bank because each one of them got 100 Westmarks.
Yeah.
They called it a freedom money, or I'm not sure, but there was long lines at the bank to get that money. And then they went and had a day, and they all went back.
Yeah.
Their homes were in the East. They just wanted the ability to travel. They wanted the ability, like everybody else, is to get around and to do their thing. But those first 5 or 6 days were just a total nightmare for all 4 of the NCOICs. There were 4 of us. So it was pretty rough.
Colin Munro was the deputy head of mission at the British Embassy to East Germany.
Well, I can tell you exactly. It's like Kennedy's assassination. Everybody remembers where they were on that day. I was at a conference in the Reichstag in West, which is just over the border in West Berlin, and it was one of these. There were endless meetings and discussions and visits and goodness knows what. And anyway, this I think there were a whole lot of Bundestag deputies from West Germany there, and we were having a drink at the end of the conference, and the host, the Minister for Inner German Relations, Frau Dorothea Wilms, was giving a nice little speech from a lectern, and then somebody came into the room and handed her a note. And she said, I think you're going to all be very interested in this. This is what Gunter Schabowski has just said at the press conference in the evening press conference in East Berlin, sort of about 500 meters away at the press center. And I've never seen journalists part company with their drinks so fast in all my life. And so we all rushed off to our to our stations to find out what was going on. And in my case, that meant driving back home over Bornholmer Strasse. I was pretty tired. Anyway, I thought I'll go via Bornholmer Strasse anyway, as usual, and I'll ask the Fopos what's going on. So I got to Bornholmer Strasse. This must have been about 7:45 or something. And there were a few people, a few more than normal, sort of milling around on the eastern side of the wall. I said, what's going on? What's this stuff about Schabowski? And they said, we haven't heard anything. Nobody tells us anything. And so I went home, and I told my wife what was going on. And we thought, well, we'll switch on the telly and see what's going on. And we were completely exhausted, I have to tell you. So we watched Heute Journal at 9:45, and they said the crowds were growing, but there was still no sign. The wall wasn't open or anything like that. So we went to bed, and the whole thing blew up at 10:30. And my wife was uneasy or something. She got up in the middle of the night and switched on the telly and saw these amazing scenes. One member of the embassy had actually sort of stayed up all night and had gone with the flow and all the rest of it. It was absolutely, it's just amazing, and it was it was absolutely miraculous that it all happened peacefully. Not a shot was fired, nobody was in, and then of course over the subsequent weekend, the way, German efficiency, everybody got their Begrüßungsgeld, 100 marks. On the first night, they all got free beer. And some of them got Begrüßungsgeld several times over, I have to tell you.
Alistair took up a teaching post in Halle, East Germany, in August 1989.
One of the things I wanted to do when I went to East Germany was to learn Russian, because I'd always wanted to learn it. I never had the opportunity at school. I didn't have the opportunity at university in London. So I thought, if I'm going to East Germany, then surely there must be ways that I can learn Russian there. So I hooked into the local evening school. It was a school, a regular state school that offered classes for adults in the evening. And I found lots of Russian courses there. So I just signed up to a Russian course. And I went there, and I think there were about 15 of us in the class, 14 East Germans and me. There was a German teacher who taught Russian. It was really interesting to talk to some of the others because they could not understand why a British person would be in East Germany learning Russian of an evening.
Yeah, they must have definitely thought you were a card-carrying member of...
Well, they thought I was something anyway. And there was one elderly man there. He was so nice. And he came up to me after the first lesson and spoke a little bit of English. Actually, I do speak fluent German, but he spoke English. He'd been a prisoner of war in the Second World War in Yorkshire. And he'd had the time of his life, he said, at this prisoner of war camp in Yorkshire.
Oh, wow.
And there was a picture in the classroom of Erich Honecker, then leader of the SED, on the wall, as there was in every classroom. And so I must have gone to these Russian lessons once or twice a week for about 6 weeks. And then maybe in the 7th week, I was walking home and I met a student of mine from the university. And he just came up to me and said, "You'll never believe what's going on. Have you seen the television?" And I said, "No, I haven't." And he said, "They've said that the Berlin Wall's come down, that they're letting everybody through." So, rushed home to the television and then saw all the news about what was happening. And then I went back to my Russian class the following week, and the portrait of Erich Honecker had disappeared.
And was Egon Krenz in its place?
No, it wasn't.
Interesting.
Yeah. Things were moving at such a pace then.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was no logical order to it,
Yeah. And what was the next day like in Halle after that news of the Berlin Wall opening?
All I remember is lots of people on the trams with huge bottles of champagne singing. That's all I remember.
There's more information on this episode and our other Berlin Wall episodes in our show notes, which can be found as a link in your podcast app. If you like what you're hearing, sign up to our email list at coldwarconversations.com. If you can't wait for the next episode, do visit our Facebook discussion group where guests and listeners continue the Cold War conversation. Just search Cold War Conversations in Facebook. Thank you very much for listening. It is really appreciated. Goodbye.